November 13th. We'll start with the big news here in Washington, because after 43 days, the longest ever federal government shutdown officially ended last night. I was on the Hill as the legislation passed the House, 222 to 209, with 6 Democrats joining Republicans to get it over the finish line. 2 Republicans also voted with the majority of Democrats against that bill, and we'll get into what was in those votes in just a moment. It then went to President Trump, who signed the legislation in a late-night Oval Office event surrounded by Republican members of Congress, as well as members of his cabinet and business leaders. There, he continued to blame Democrats for the shutdown.
Today, we're sending a clear message that we will never give in to extortion, because that's what it was. They tried to extort. The Democrats tried to extort our country. Republicans never wanted a shutdown and voted 15 times for a clean continuation of funding. There's never been a time when one or the other party ever didn't sign a continuation. It's just a continuation, not a big deal. It's a continuation, and we'll talk later. Yet the extremists in the other party insisted on creating the longest government shutdown in American history, and they did it purely for political reasons.
Now, this package extends government funding through January 30th, which means that's an inflection point in the future. But it also includes a minibus of 3 full-year appropriations bills, while also fully funding SNAP benefits through the end of next September and reversing layoffs that took place during the shutdown, while blocking more until February. Still at issue, though, is the Affordable Care Act subsidies that were at the heart of this debate for Democrats, an extension of which was not included in the final deal despite Democratic demands. House Speaker Mike Johnson and fellow Republican leaders haven't committed to a vote on extending those subsidies, and Johnson, again, doubled down following the vote Wednesday night, reiterating he can't guarantee that vote.
Who are you going to trust to fix health care? It's the Republican Party, because we have volumes of ideas on how to do this, on how to fix it, on how to drive costs down, and how to increase access to care and quality of care, and you're going to see all that vigorous debate. So the answer to your question is, am I going to guarantee a vote on ACA unreformed COVID-era subsidies that is just a boondoggle to insurance companies and robs the taxpayer? We got a lot of work to do on that. The Republicans would demand a lot of reforms before anything like that was ever possible, and we have to go through that deliberative process.
Important to note there, he says unreformed. That does leave an opening for a reformed package, which they are negotiating in the Senate. Nevertheless, in an effort to get that vote, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries did introduce a discharge petition yesterday that would force consideration of legislation to extend expiring ACA subsidies cleanly, no reforms, for another 3 years. The petition would need 218 signatures, meaning that if all 214 Democrats sign it, 4 Republicans would also need to join the effort. That's a process that takes a while. Discharge petitions are lengthy. They require a lot of patience. But we're going to hear more from Leader Jeffries directly, coming up on Way Too Early in just a bit. Joining us now here at the table, Capitol Hill reporter Julie Grace Brufke. Julie Grace, you and I were on the Hill together last night, so I thank you for getting up early. Talk about how this went down, because I think there's interesting things happening in the Democratic side of the equation, mostly a lot of frontliners who know that the dynamics back home are tough. Maybe this vote helps them. But on the Republican side, too, there's some interesting dynamics. Talk us through what you saw last night.
The House back and as dramatic as ever. So
yeah, they are so back.
I mean, there's definitely, it relatively coasted with Republicans, with the exception of Greg Steube and Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie kind of always being against CRs. But there was an interesting provision in there that allows a group of senators to be able to sue a federal agency if their records are seized without being notified. So that's kind of been a big source of drama on the House side, which I know I talked to a number of House members that were kind of on the fence over whether they should vote for it before Mike Johnson ultimately said that they would bring a standalone bill to reverse that language, which will probably go nowhere in the Senate. So
yeah.
that's
And I think that this is actually really important, right? Because there's a larger deal to reopen the government, and that is so important after 43 days, historic shutdown. But this was a provision that kind of went under the radar in the Senate. It stems from the fact that 8 senators on the Republican side are now basically trying to get some recourse for the fact that DOJ, in the course of investigating the January 6th insurrection and what happened between the White House and the Hill that day, they looked at their phone records. They did not wiretap them. They just looked at what incoming calls were coming and what outgoing calls were going. And now they are saying that they want to be able to sue the DOJ for $500,000. And Greg Steube, the reason he voted no, he said, I'm not voting to give Lindsey Graham $500,000.
Absolutely. And we heard Lindsey Graham say that he wants to make it painful, that he was leaning into this provision. And I've never seen, should say, haven't seen Mike Johnson that worked up in a while when he was discussing it last night, where he said he's spoken to John Thune, but that there haven't been any assurances from the Senate that they're going to bring up that standalone bill, which is almost guaranteed to pass the House.
Yeah, so the shutdown ends, but there is the lingering question of, is something about to get pulled out of it? And quite frankly, the House might vote on that standalone bill to pull that DOJ provision out, but I don't know that the Senate is going to do that. So that's one thing for us to watch in the dynamics of the House doing its job, reopening the government, coming back to work for the first time in many, many weeks. But there's also the thing that brought too, which is the swearing in of Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva, 7 weeks after winning a special election to succeed her late father, Raul Grijalva. Her seating was delayed during the government shutdown after the House Speaker refused to administer the oath until a funding bill passed. Speaking immediately after being sworn in, Grijalva criticized House Republican leadership for that delay.
It has been 50 days since the people of Arizona's 7th Congressional District elected me to represent them. 50 days that over 800,000 Arizonans have been left without access to the basic services that every constituent deserves. This is an abuse of power. One individual should not be able to unilaterally obstruct the swearing in of a duly elected member of Congress for political reasons.
Democrats say the stalling of Grijalva's swearing in was political, preventing her vote to release the Jeffrey Epstein files, as her signature was needed to hit the 218 signature threshold on the discharge petition to release the files. You're going to be hearing a lot about discharge petitions because they basically force leadership's hand on votes that they don't want to put on the floor, but Congress compels them to. And of course, Grijalva's first act was to sign that petition. And with that, the bipartisan Epstein discharge petition now moves forward in the House. Democrats cheering her on, and 2 Epstein survivors were actually in the chamber to witness the signing. You see her there at the well. Under House rules, that final needed signature triggers mandatory action now by Speaker Mike Johnson. He said yesterday a vote on the Epstein bill, titled the Epstein Files Transparency Act, would actually be brought to the floor next week. While it now looks like it'll pass the House, it faces an uphill and I would say near impossible battle in the Senate. On social media yesterday, President Trump called out Republicans backing the bill, saying any lawmaker on the right supporting it was, quote, very bad or stupid, and stressed there should be no deflection to Epstein. Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, the House Republican leading the charge on this effort, said he spoke to his own colleagues about that vote.
I've already had a couple Republicans tell my office privately that they're going to vote for it, and I think that could snowball. The deal for Republicans on this vote is that Trump will protect you if you vote the wrong way. In other words, if you vote to cover up for pedophiles, you've got cover in a Republican primary. But I would remind my colleagues that this vote is going to be on your record for longer than Trump is going to be president. And what are you going to do in 2028 and 2030 when you're in a debate, either with a Republican or a Democrat, and they say, how can we trust you? You covered up for a pedophile back in, 2025.
It's a pretty dire warning from Thomas Massie there, but he's hitting on a dynamic where I've also talked to members who weren't on the discharge petition, but will sign on to the effort, meaning that there's probably a larger margin of passage here than the White House would like to see. But the Speaker says he's going to put it on the floor.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's going to be a sizable number of Republicans that maybe weren't willing to kind of sidestep leadership on things, but want to kind of see this out there. And some of those members that did sign on to the discharge petition were some of Trump's biggest allies. Lauren Boebert's on there, Nancy Mace is on there. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. And I mean, it's going to be also interesting to see how the Senate kind of plays this, because they haven't really faced the pressure that the House has. And it's kind of been all eyes on the House. And these people are hearing about it back home, and it's not an issue that's going away. And I think John Thune's going to be definitely getting an earful about it. And these Republican senators are going to kind of see some of the pressure that these House members have been under.
Yeah, I think the important thing for viewers who are like, oh, it's all happening, the files are coming out, that's not actually what's about to happen. And so I think it's important for us to do a bit of a reality check. Yes, the House is going to bring it up. It sounds like Mike Johnson is actually just going to bring it up on suspension or something to quicken the process, because he knows that this is inevitable at this point. But that after the House passes it, which it seems likely that it will, there are very few compulsion methods used to be able to bring this up in the Senate. That's not to say that some Republican senators won't push for it. John Kennedy is the first person that comes to mind from Louisiana. He's been clear about wanting transparency on this. But I think for those who think it's happening tomorrow, it's happening whenever this happens, it's not. And I think this is still a long road ahead.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it's an issue that the Republican base really cares about and has been pushing for. And I think it's kind of the one thing that we've kind of seen some hardliners kind of break with Trump on. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And I mean, if it somehow does get through the Senate, which I'm guessing it probably doesn't go far in the Senate, I mean, the optics of him vetoing that would also kind of to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, that's the eventual conclusion if we were able to see the Senate act on it. And again, big if, probably a 60-vote threshold. I would have trouble coming up with what that whip list is, but maybe that's a problem for another day with a little bit more sleep. Capitol Hill reporter Julie Grace Brufke, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.